Welcome to Conversations with Plastics News. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bill Wood. I'm the economics editor for Plastics News magazine, and I have the distinct pleasure today of being joined by Mr. Mike Devereux. Mike is a CPA, and he's the director of plastics industry services for Mueller Prost. Mike and I are going to talk about my second favorite topic behind economics, and that's taxes. Thank you for joining us today, Mike.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bill.
Let's jump right in because there's no reason to delay the tax talk. Thinking about the plastics industry here, what deductions and or credits are most missed on plastics manufacturers' income tax returns?
Well, you know, there's a few. There's the research and development tax credit, which candidly a lot of processors self-censor themselves. They don't realize what they're doing on a day in and day out basis is research and development related to their manufacturing processes. With respect to those processes, their customers own the designs of the part. These processors aren't taking research credits for the design of that part, that widget, that plastic part that's being manufactured. They're taking it for the manufacturing process. They have to design and develop a new mold that's novel, it's unique, it's one of a kind. They have to test that mold, run samples, and that's all research and experimentation. These research expenditures can be quite significant. It spans multiple different cost centers within the organization, beginning with the sales department and talking about with the customers manufacturability and so forth. So for instance, if I have a salesman that's meeting with a customer and they give us a part design and the salesman says, well, you know, if you increase the draft a little bit here, we'll be able to eject the part easier and you're going to save money on the tool costs. Well, that design change isn't necessarily related to the fit and form and function of that part, it's related to the manufacturability, and that's research and development. In addition, there was a court case a few years ago that allowed you to potentially include the cost of molds. Now, every plastic processor spends a significant dollar amount on molds each and every year on their new projects, and that can be an eligible expenditure. So I have plastics processors that are in the $20 to $30 million sales range that are claiming upwards of $100,000, $200,000 in tax credits each year.
Wow, okay. Tell me about new laws or regulations that affect plastics professionals.
Well, keeping with the research theme here, there's new Code Section 174 regulations, and those Code Section 174 regulations really expanded for plastics processors what qualifies as a research expenditure. You know, if you're developing new equipment, new machinery, or new processes in-house, and you're developing that piece of equipment, and you haven't eliminated design uncertainty at the time of the construction of that equipment, you may not be required to capitalize that piece of equipment. It may be a research expenditure. So what these new regulations have done is they've created kind of a bright line is when did I eliminate the design uncertainty? And the expenditures that are incurred before that time are eligible research expenditures, which means not only could they be deducted, currently deducted under Code Section 174A, but they can also potentially be eligible for the R&D tax credit, which can be upwards of 6 to 7% of whatever that spend is at the federal level. In addition, about 35 states have a research credit that follow the definition of the federal credit. So it's almost like a double dip if you live in a state or work in a state that has a research tax credit. You know, some of the larger ones are Arizona and California and Iowa and some others. In fact, in Iowa, and you don't even have to be making money yet. It's a refundable credit. So startup companies that are developing new processes or new products in the state of Iowa can qualify. So it can be significant. You know, another regulatory change we had surrounds tangible property. So if you're purchasing tangible property, such as equipment and machinery or replacement parts or emergency and spare and roadable parts for your machinery equipment, the question is am I required to capitalize it, or may I deduct them as a repair expenditure or a maintenance expenditure? And there's all these exceptions to it, and they issued these new regulations just this last year. And they're effective for the current tax period we're in now, is 2014, where companies are filing their 2014 income tax returns, and they're required to either make these changes in accounting method or be forced to comply with things that aren't necessarily favorable to the processor. Obviously, for most processors, they want to get that expense rather than capitalize it and realize the benefit over a 3 to 10 year period. So molds are a 3-year asset. Is it a potential? Is there any potential to that being expense? So these tangible property regulations, every single plastics manufacturer out there should be considering at least 4 to 5 changes in accounting methods that will help them on their 2014 tax return and beyond.
Great, great. There's a lot of hot air out of Washington pertaining to tax reform. Let's assume that happens. What can plastics processors expect from tax reform?
Well, I think that that's a pretty big assumption that it's going to happen. I mean, right now, the party leaderships of both parties is pretty polar opposite. You know, you've got the leadership on the opposite ends of the spectrum, and coming together and compromising, I think, will be difficult in 2015, just because of the nature of the party system we have, and how they're going to pay for it is the big difference. You know, I think that there is a possibility. They are working on it. The Senate has formed 5 groups, working groups, for different segments that pay income tax, in order to explore different ways how tax reform could happen. But I'm not sure how much these groups are working together. So for instance, there is a group for corporations. There's a working group for individuals. But as you may know, about 75% of the businesses out there are what's called flow-through entities. They're S corporations or partnerships. So they're not paying tax at the corporate level. That income and profits and losses and credits and deductions are flowing out to them on what's called Schedule K-1. And then the shareholders or members, if it's an LLC or partners, pay income tax at the individual level. So when we talk about tax reform, well, maybe we lower the rates and get rid of some of these benefits for special deductions and credits and so forth. But if we only do it at the corporate level, you've still got a 39.6 top rate at the individual level, and you'd be taking away credits and benefits from small businesses. And candidly, the small businesses are the job creators. They're the ones that are creating the most jobs in the U.S., and to not look at everything as holistically and say, well, how are we going to do it across the board, I think would be a mistake. I think that the groups need to talk more and so forth. In addition, I'm not sure that we should get rid of the credits and incentives, because we're trying to be competitive in a world stage, and there are already industrialized nations that have lower tax rates, and they have things like the R&D tax credit in addition to that lower tax rate. So to be competitive and make sure that the innovation and jobs are here in the United States, we need to be competitive and put ourselves on a level playing field, because we're at a disadvantage now.
Very good, thank you. Shift gears a little bit here. Still want to talk about taxes and take the angle on that, but business owners who want to exit their business, what planning opportunities or strategic moves can they make 3 years, 5 years in advance to make the most of their exit strategy? Well,
there's a couple of things to consider. Probably the biggest thing on business owners' minds would be the estate tax. There are certain things that we can do to plan to get some of the assets out of that state. So for instance, I can sell to an intentionally defective grantor trust. And what that means is I'm selling part of my stock to a trust, but for federal income tax purposes, that trust is me. It's a grantor trust. And by doing so, the future sale of that would be outside of my estate, and it would go to my beneficiaries. The dollars would go to my beneficiaries, and I get to kind of lock in that value from an estate tax perspective at the time that I transfer some of those shares to that intentionally defective grantor trust. In addition, there's a concept called personal goodwill. Perhaps there's personal goodwill with the business owner. He is the one that has the contacts. He is the one that he may own goodwill. My partner Adam Herman has done a lot of work in this area and is a known expert and will value that personal goodwill, and it's outside of the company's assets. So with a C corporation, you're only paying that one level of tax outside of the C corp. And then finally, you know, we talk about financial due diligence a lot in the CPA world with respect to the sale of stock or assets of a company. And what I think you need to do is marry financial due diligence and operational due diligence, because those are very distinct and different topics or different issues for manufacturers, but they need to be looked at together. So by looking at not just the financial due diligence side of things, but looking at operations and making sure that when those business owners leave, that there's not going to be this void, this sucking sound out of the business, that when they're out, you can't continue to operate in the same fashion. So not just looking at things narrowly, because a lot of times you might have the operational due diligence done by the buyer's engineers or chief operating officer, and you might have the financial due diligence being done by the CFO and perhaps supported by a CPA firm. But are they talking? And that's the key, to make sure that it's integrated together and you don't have any surprises. And you know, a lot of the times we find that, you know, buyers want to buy assets, and sellers, of course, want to sell stock. But a lot of times we see more asset deals than anything else, because I can amortize the goodwill over a 15-year period, and that's important to buyers. And so we see that quite a bit.
Terrific. All right, I have one more question for you. As a CPA, you're used to the high life. You know what fun is like. Tell me about the best thing you've seen at NPE 2015 so far.
Well, we're at the beginning of day 2, and I was standing at our booth most of the day yesterday and giving a presentation as well. But I think the answer is easy. It's the people. I mean, this is such a neat industry. I think I've told you before, I spend a little over half of my time in the plastics industry, and I just enjoy it. And you don't enjoy that without liking the people that you're working with. And you know, I had dinner last night with a few folks that it was just a lot of fun. And there's always this thirst for knowledge here at NPE. Everyone wants to learn more so that they can compete not only in a global environment, but here within the United States. And this whole place is just full of innovation. It's fantastic. I love it coming here. I wish it was every year. I do, because it's a fun conference to go to. I learn a lot. You know, we're always learning about the industry, but the people make it good. You know, hanging out with guys like you.
There you go. Well, thank you. So I'm just going to wrap this up real quick, summarize. If people are willing to invest the time and effort it takes to learn more about taxes with your assistance, they will actually have to pay fewer taxes. And I know people get excited about paying taxes and all that, but you can help them with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. We don't mind spending some time on our nickel to see if we can help. Just candidly, it really just is a conversation similar to this. And are you doing these sort of things? Have you had these type of expenditures? And if so, there's probably some tax benefits that are out there for you. Whether you look at the prior 3 years and it's worthy of amending your returns, or perhaps you just modify some things and capture some of these benefits going forward. See, that's what's going to make you competitive, because the savings can be significant with respect to some of these topics I talked about.
Outstanding. Well, thank you. Our guest today has been Mike Devereux, Director of Plastics Industry Services for Mueller, Prost.